Ugh. Good morning.
If you have if you can plug this in, it'll give you a whole bunch of
I don't want
extra
a whole,
plugs.
I don't want it.
But I need to be able to plug in.
Then plug it in somewhere else. Barbara, I could
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
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 Shabbos, Judy. What kind of snow conditions do you have around your area, Judy?
So the streets are clear. Had a great walk this morning. It's cold.
Yeah,
Pretty.
we've got a lot of slush and a few inches, but it just, I don't know if it's safe to walk on. I'm thinking about doing a test, 10 minutes into town and back to see if I can at least walk in the middle of the streets, but it doesn't look safe.
Yeah, we walked on the street the whole time.
We just had our sidewalks plowed.
Good for you. Sidewalks. Wow, you get good service in your
Hey,
town.
listen, this is
This is New
New
Hampshire.
Hampshire. We're used to snow.
New Hampshire, you can always tell when you cross from Massachusetts to New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
The roads are so good there and ours are so bad.
Yep.
There are
Absolutely.
signs up in my neighborhood that the city is going to come by and I guess plow. They say no parking on Saturday, and nobody knows where to put their cars to clear the street. So there are cars on both sides of the street. I don't know how they're going to widen the streets and go around the corners and pick up the snow. But we've had a lot of snow here for sure in Pennsylvania.
So Jenny, you don't have what we have, which is an automatic a street ban, a street parking ban. And before it even starts and people have to move into public parking areas, but if they're on the street and truly in the middle, in the way, they'll get towed.
Well, this isn't a neighborhood. I mean, the main travel streets do have those parking bans. But there are some cars that I'm sure that are just in till the spring. I mean, they didn't shovel out in front or in back. And I just can't see how with the frozen, the cold and all, the mounds of snow that they're going to be out until it melts, But I've been out there going on the municipal golf course, cross-country skiing, and it's beautiful. You warm up very quickly, even when it's in the 20s.
That's for
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Shabbos, everybody.
Travis, Sharon.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
So I'm going to miss out joining you all for the adult ed for a while because my local synagogue has been doing a program on Islam and the Jews, going back to the beginning of Islam, 1622.
Six.
And I've been interested, 622, and I've been interested in learning more about Islam on my own. And then when this became available to watch, to participate, it just seemed, okay, it's not the way it is today, but let's go back to the beginning and see, how it all began. So, that'll take me through to the beginning of April, I think. So
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Jenny. It really sounds very interesting.
Great.
It's gonna switch to Mondays.
Hi, Kristen.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos, Kristen. Hello.
Nice to see sun in Newburyport.
Yeah, it is sun. I was going to say glare, but that too, but it's sun. Yeah, you don't have any. Yeah, oh, good.
Just came out.
Plows there. So you get the sidewalk plow there?
Sounds like it, but he just did our side.
Yeah, he's to the other side.
I just sent some Hamantaschen to my daughter, and I realized it's really almost not worth doing it. To go across country, I mean, you have a few Hamantaschen in there, and it's almost like $20.
I know.
It's
It's
crazy.
terrible.
You're not
But Janny,
Yeah.
She's gonna appreciate it because you made it.
Okay.
That's why you paid for it.
I guess that's true.
She's gonna
You know,
love it.
Jenny,
She
mail her the
better
recipe. You can do it
appreciate
for
it, right?
50 cents.
And I even sent a flavor that most people like. I love mun, and very few people do. So I just
Oh, we do.
yeah.
Not me.
The only kind I
Absolutely.
like,
I like prune. Prune is okay, but one.
prune's all right.
One is the best.
Prune is second, one is first.
Yeah, mun is first with me too, and I like.
I only like it on bagels.
All the others are yuppie hummintushin.
Oh,
Well, like chocolate and
Chocolate,
blueberries.
yeah, all those
Ask
fruits.
Alex.
apricot is good.
That's the same with the bagels. You know, these bagels that have all these different flavors in them. Give me a good egg bagel that Judy brings from New York, and I'm
Oh,
happy.
really?
All
Something you can
right.
eat tomorrow?
I just like the water bagels, the plain ones.
Oh, they're a little boring, Mike.
Ah.
Sorry. The difference between you and me. Oops.
That's okay.
That was terrible.
Bonnie, I
wasn't it?
appreciate that.
No.
I did that on purpose, and you know that.
I know. Big hug, Bonnie.
Yeah.
I've really been enjoying the bagels that I made, and I'm thinking you got to eat all of these up because Passover's coming. I mean, I've got bagels and I've got some sourdough bread and tortillas and pitas, and I just got to get it all into my tummy or something. I'll bring it to a food bank, I guess.
That reminds me of a nightmare I had, and I didn't realize until I woke up. I told somebody who keeps kosher that I had already bought my my matzah, and realized after, and they just said, "Oh, isn't that nice?" They were very pleasant about it, and I thought I realized anyway, that you shouldn't have it in your house even before you've cleaned out all your
The
what's that
hummus.
called? Yeah, hummus. Yeah. So because I was doing some shopping the other day in Seabrook, they had a whole table out, and I said, "I love the whole wheat. I'm grabbing it while I can get it." So for those of you who think it's bad luck or whatever, or wrong to have it in the house in a box in the basement, you know, mostly protected from the mice, it doesn't matter. Yeah, turn on your mic. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom never worried about that.
No. Okay. So it's not a.
I've never heard of that.
It was a self-imposed nightmare that I shouldn't have said that to that person.
There might be something about it. I don't know.
People who are super from probably do worry about contamination, but my family never did.
Okay.
I just want to tell a story about a Holocaust survivor that I worked with, who came from some small town in Hungary, a very religious family. And she told me that after Purim, there would be a group of women who came to the house who rolled matzah, who made matzah, and then put it on the rafters to dry, to, you know. So there's a tradition really that that month or more, it's all about getting ready for Passover. So Bonnie, you're clear. You're totally clear.
Yeah, and my worst thought is that I think it was you in my nightmare telling me, being nice. You just did one of those, you know, when you don't want to say anything bad to somebody, you just say, "Oh, that's good," you know.
Well,
I don't know. Anyway, now full disclosure, I feel I got it off my chest. I can now pray.
You confessed.
You know what? What occurs to me is that family, they might, if they're Orthodox and from enough, they use for shmura matzah. They don't want to buy matzah in the store.
Yeah. No, my mom was raised Orthodox, which is why I say my mom never worried about that. So I always follow what she did.
I saw the rice cakes this year, which is great if you're gluten-free, but maybe they've been out for years and I just didn't notice them. So I'm wondering if you're Ashkenazi, if because they're kosher for Passover, and even if you don't have celiac or you're eating gluten, should you be able to eat rice cakes? You know, because rice is not anything that an Ashkenazi would eat.
No.
Didn't they
No, I don't think so.
change? Didn't they put in like a codicil or something like that?
There
that
is.
that we can do that now?
There is, in the conservative movement, there are opinions both ways, I think, and I think the majority was that the rice and the other things, I can't remember, the kitniyot or something.
Neo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, we
Quinoa.
no, kitniyot. It's a term
sorry.
for things like legumes and stuff
Yeah,
like
all
that.
those things are supposed to be forbidden.
Well, under the
Last year.
Ashkenazic, but not the Sephardic. Or maybe the Sephardic too for that. The rice is definitely Sephardics are allowed to eat, but the whole rationale, Ben Resnick gave a whole thing
Right.
about
That's what
only
I'm
Ben can do.
remembering was the presentation that he gave.
Alex
on
gave a whole thing on it last year.
Oh,
right.
did he?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think
I
we
must
need
have.
it again.
And yeah, that's fine. We have a whole month to go over this again. But it's certainly,
Yeah.
Clearly,
Nothing better to
we
do.
need a reminder.
great. I'm going to take that as my own intercession and time to get started. We're a couple minutes later than usual. I'm also perfectly happy to let that couple minutes slip because it was nice it felt like, when the couple minutes in the real world before we get started, when we're all catching up and talking. But certainly, preparing for Pesach a month out is not only like acceptable in custom, but also, as we mentioned last week, talking about Shabbat Shkalim, it's very much like encouraged, right? Purim is not a biblical holiday, and so really what we're on right now is we're straight on the path to Pesach. We should be preparing and getting ready and trying to remember all these weird rules that we sometimes don't fully remember what they are, why they exist, and buying matzah, if you see it in the store, is fine, as long as, you're not opening it up and crumbling it together with the last of your breadcrumbs or something like that. But I don't think you would do that, Bonnie. And even, so plenty to go over the course of the next month. But right now, of course, we're focused on Shabbat morning, on Parshat Terumah, on February 20th, and Pesach will come when it will. So I want to get us started this morning. For those of you who are just joining us, obviously, and not surprisingly, the conversation this morning started with snow, because there's been a lot of it for the first winter in a while. It feels like we're having a snowy winter. And I was trying to figure out what to lead with this morning, what to start with, what to kind of set some intention with. And I was going back and forth between a bunch of themes in this morning's readings, both the theme of like building the Mishkan and physical space, which we'll talk about, or possibly the theme of kind of memory and the memory of memory embodied within peoplehood that we'll talk about when we get to Parshat Zachor, which is the additional reading for this morning. And then when I woke up this morning, and Mac and I woke up, and we were both, the plow came by at 2:30 a.m. So we were both like a little bit out of it, a little bit cranky, and getting out of bed a little bit late. And that was specifically directed at the snow. But both of us made our way downstairs and poured a cup of coffee, and it was like, I don't know how many else of you had this morning, but there was just like a wonderful, gentle, big flakes snow coming down very slowly, where both of us were kind of just staring out the window. And especially, we live in a super old house that has some centuries old glass that still gives that kind of distorted image of the outside world. And we felt like we were in a snow globe. And there was like some beautiful sense of peace and quiet, and kind of, despite the plow coming by and waking us up in the middle of the night, the sense that getting to start our day amidst that quiet and peacefulness and beauty was a really kind of special moment. And so I found a short poem by a poet named Hilda Conkling, who was born right around the turn of the 20th century, and actually wrote all her published poetry within the first 15 years of her life. So this is a poem and she grew up in Massachusetts, so she probably knows what she's talking about when it comes to snow. And this is a poem that was published when she was 12 years old, called Snow Morning. Morning is a picture again, with snow-puffed branches out of the wind, with the sky caught like a blue feather in the butternut tree. I cannot see the world behind the snow, but when I look into my mind, there with all its people and colors, the world sits smiling, quiet, warm, and cozy. Yeah, and so I hope we're able to take, good advantage of that quiet, warm, and cozy within our own personal spaces and within our own Shabbos morning. And with that, I will put the Siddur up on the screen, and I will ask Max Kirstein to unmute himself, and we will get going this morning with Ma Tovu. Oops, sorry, that is the wrong screen. Max, give me 1 sec. There we go. Whenever you're ready.
Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael.
And we will continue on page 65 with Birchot HaShachar. If you would like, please rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech bin vina lechavin ben yom uvelayla.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzomo.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurumim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokev kefufim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokei haaretz al chamayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asali kol tzorki.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzedei gaver.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvu raha.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifareh.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten leach koach.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamevir shenai me'enai utnumach me'afapai.
Amen. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, removing sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. And we will continue on page 72 with the closing paragraph of the Psalm for Shabbat, Sadiq Tamar.
Sadikata chamar yifra ka'erez bal va'anam yiske shetulim b'veit Adonai b'tzarot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenuvun b'seva Deshenim v'ranananim yiyu lechagid ki asher Adonai sori v'lo avla tabo.
Thank you, Max. And we will continue with our first Mourner's Kaddish of the morning on page 82. If you'd like to unmute either to join me or to respond, please do so now. Yitgadal, v'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divrach yirtei, ve'amlich malchutei, ve'chayechon, ve'yomechon, uv'chayei b'chol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, Vizman Kariv, Vimru, Amen.
Hey, Shmei, Rabbo, Mevorach,
Rabba Marach, Leolam Aleomaya.
Yitbarach, Yishtabach, V'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitazar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal,
Halal Shmeid.
Brichu. Le'ela mitzchol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, v'amiran be'alma v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Shlam Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Shalom mimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
And I'm going to put everyone back on mute. And Max, one more time, if you want to unmute yourself as we continue with Baruch She'amar.
Baruch She'amar v'yachaya olam. Baruch Hu. Baruch Oseh v'yareshit. Baruch Omer v'yoseh. Baruch Gozer Kayem. Baruch Mirachem al haaretz, Baruch Mirachem al habriot, Baruch Mishalem shekar tov li'av, Baruch halead v'kam lanesach, Baruch podeh umatzil, Baruch Shemo.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. Compassionate creator, extolled by your people, glorified by your faithful servants. We laud you with the psalms of your servant David. We extol you in song. We celebrate your fame in melody. We proclaim you sovereign, singular, eternal God. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign, magnified with songs of praise. You may be seated if any of you are standing, and we'll continue on page 96 with the Ashrei. I want to try something slightly different this week, and we'll see how it works. Which is basically I want to kind of experiment a little bit more with not all being muted at the same time. Even if it's not ideal, I do really kind of miss hearing cacophonous voices. So what we're going to try this week is I'm going to invite anyone who wants to unmute for the Ashrei, and I'll say the kind of A part, the first line, and whoever wants to chime in all together, whoever's familiar with the words can do the responsive lines. So we'll give it a go and see how it goes. Ashrei Ashrei Veitecha Od Yalucha Selah.
Ashrei
Ha'am
Shechalo, Ashrei Ha'am Shadonai
Hilal David, Armimcha Hayamelech, Vavarcha Shimcha Leolam Vaed.
Bechal Yom Alecha, Bechal Shemcha Leolam Vaed.
Adonai Melamed, Veligdal Ata Ein Cheker.
Oladoya Shabbat Ma'asecha Yagidu.
Adar Kevod Hodecha, Divrei Niflotecha Asicha.
Beznutecha Yomeru, Dulatcha
Zecharav Tuchai Abiu, Vetzitchacha Yiranenu.
Hanenu Adonai, Erech Apayim Gal Chesed.
Tov Adonai Lakol, Rachamav Al Kol Ma'asav.
Yadu Adonai Kol Ma'asecha.
Kevod Malchuchai Omeru, Gvurachai Yedaberu.
V'chadil
V'chadil
Brota,
V'chadil
V'chadil Malchuto.
Malchutcha Malchut Kol Amin, U'mem Shaltacha B'chol Dor V'Ador.
Sameach Adonai L'chol
Noflim, V'zokef V'chadil.
Einei Kol Echesaberu, V'atanoten Lahem Et Ochlam B'Ito.
Poter et Etecha, U'b'maspir Aratzman.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol drachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav.
Karev Adonai l'chol
Karav
korav,
L'chol
l'chol
Oh,
asher
Asher
Sheikh.
Yifrahu
yifrahu
Be'emet.
be'emet.
Etzon Rav Yaseh, v'et Shabbatam yishma v'yoshiem.
Shomer
Adonai
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 Ekol
l'chol
Ahava
ahava,
Ve'eka
v'echol
Hashayim
hashayim
Yashmi.
yashmi.
Ilat Adonai d'ver pi, v'varach kol asher shekot shalom v'ed.
Anachnu nivarech
Me'ata
Yah, me'ata
V'Yadolav.
v'yadolav.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
I'm going to put us all back on mute. Thank you all. I know that kind of what sounds good and what doesn't is very subjective, but I found that to be a beautiful rendition of the Ashrei. So thank you all for chiming in. We will continue at the bottom of page, or in the middle of page 100 with Psalm 150. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekocho, hallelujah, hallelujah, Birki Auzo, hallelujah, 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 bigurotav, hallelujah, hallelujah, kerov gulo, hallelujah, 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 b'teika shofar, hallelujah, hallelujah, b'nevel v'chinor, hallelujah, 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 betof umachol, hallelujah, hallelujah, b'minim ve'ugav, hallelujah, 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 b'tzil tzilei shama, hallelujah, hallelujah, b'tzil tzilei trua, kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah, kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah, kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah. And we'll continue towards the top of page 102 with the opening paragraph of Az Yashir. If you would like to rise, please do so. Az Yashir Moshe uvenei Yisrael et hashira hazot ladonai vayomru le'emor ashir aladonai ki ga sus verachlo rama bayam ozi bezimratya vayehi li lishua ze'eli ve'anvehu Elohei avi baromenhu. And we'll turn the page to the middle of 103. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Ki l'Adonai mulchal Moshe bo'im, v'alu Moshe bar Tzilon shvodet harisav, v'aytal Adonai hamlucha, v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, v'yom avi Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. And if you're standing, you can have a brief sit as we continue in the middle of page 105. El b'tatzumot uzecha, hagadol bichlod shemecha, hagibor lanatzach, v'anora b'noratecha, hamelech hayoshev, al kisei ram v'nisa, Shofen ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatziranu tzadikim b'Adonai l'shrim navati la befi sharim titalal u'v'divrei tzadikim titbarach u'v'ilshon chasim titromam u'bekerev kedoshim titkadash Uvmakalot, Rivivot, Amcha, Beit Yisrael, Brian Kashim Chamakin, Bechol Dor Vador, Shekin Chovat Korchim, Lefanecha, Adonai Eloheinu, V'Elhei Avotenu, Leodot La'alel, Shabech L'Faer, L'Romeim, L'Hader, L'Varech, La'ale U'Chales, Al Kol Divrei Shiro V'Tishbachot, David Ben Yishai, Abdecha Meshichecha. And on the top of 106, we rise. Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu Ayla Melech HaGadol HaKadosh B'Shamayim V'Aretz Ki Lechan Adonai Eloheinu V'Eloteinu Shiru Shvacha Halel V'Zimra Ozem Shla Netzach V'Agvura Tila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut.
Brachot v'hodaot me'ata v'yad olam. Baruch atah Adonai el melech gadol b'tishbachot. El chachodaot adon haniflaot habocher b'shrei zimrach melech el chai ha'olamim.
Amen. And anyone who wants to unmute to respond to the half Kaddish and the Baruch Hu, now is the time. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Almad brachirutei v'amlich malchutei b'chayichon v'machon v'chay l'chol Beit Yisrael b'agala b'zman kariv v'imru
Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach, Le'olam Me'omaya.
Yes,
Barach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitol Shmei l'kudesha b'richu
Brichu.
Eila mikol berchata v'shirata tushkata v'nechmata damiran be'alma v'imru
Amen.
Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach, Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech
HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or borei choshech oseh shalom borei et hakol. Praise are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, creating light and fashioning darkness, ordaining the order of all creation. We continue on the bottom of page 107. If anyone is still standing, you may be seated. Ein kerkecha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh, v'ein zlatecha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes biltecha go'enu mot HaMashiach, v'ein domeh lecha Moshienu l'tchiyat ha'metim. El Adon al kol ha'masim baruch u'mvorach befi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo. Malei olam da'at u'tfuna sovevi moto Hamitgael chayot hakodesh v'nehedar bechavod al hamerkava zechut u'mishor lifnei chiso chesed rachamim lifnei kevodo Tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram beda'at bevina uv'haskel koach u'gvura natan bahem liot moshlim bekerev tevel beleim ziv umfikim noga na'ezivam bechol ha'olam Semechim betzeitam v'sasim bevoam osim v'eimaretzon konam pe'er v'chavod notnim lishmot tzala verina lezecher malchuto kara lashemesh v'yizrach ora'a v'hitkin surat alvana shevach notnim lo kol tzeva marom tiferet u'gedula srafim ve'ofanim v'chayot hakodesh nai 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 page to the bottom of 110 and continue with Or Chadash. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, 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 Veniske kulanu meheira leoro, Veniske kulanu meheira leoro, Baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. And on the top of page 111, let's read together in the English. Deep is your love for us, Adonai our God, boundless your tender compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, you taught our ancestors life-giving laws. They trusted in you, for their sake graciously teach us. Our Maker, merciful provider, show us mercy, grant us discernment and understanding. Then will we study your Torah, heed its words, teach its precepts, and follow its instruction, lovingly fulfilling all its teachings. Open our eyes to your Torah, help our hearts cleave to your mitzvot, unite all our thoughts to love and revere you. Then we will never be brought to shame, for we trust in your awesome holiness and will delight in your deliverance. Bring us safely from the four corners of the earth and lead us in dignity to our holy land. For you are the source of deliverance. You have called us from all peoples and tongues, constantly drawing us nearer to you, that we may lovingly offer you praise, proclaiming your oneness. Praised are you, Adonai, who loves the people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'amo Yisrael, v'yahava. And on the top of page 112, unmute yourself and let's join together for the Shema and V'ahavta.
Shema Yisrael,
Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Asher Anoki Mitzavka Yom HaLevovech Shinantam Levoneka V'dibarta Bam Shivteka V'veiteka V'cha V'derek V'shuvcha Meka Shartam Leot Al Yodeka Ayilatotofos Beinineka Tavtam Al Mizot Beiteka Uvishareka.
אם שמוע תשמעו מצוותיי אשר אנוכי מצוותכם היום לאהבת אדוני אלוהיכם ולעבדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם ונתתי את ארצכם מתורה מקוש ואספת דגנך ותירושך ויצהרך ונתתי עשב בשדך לבהמתך ואכלת ושבעת הישמרו לכם Peniftem levavchem vesartem, v'avaratem Elohim acherim v'ishtachavitem lahem, v'charaf Adonai bachem, v'atzart hashamayim v'lo yeh matar, v'ha'adama lo titen tivula, v'avaratem mehira, ve'al ha'aretz hatova, asher Adonai noten lachem, v'samtem et dvarai ele al levavchem al nafshechem, Ukshartem otam ot ayetchem, vayul totafot benechem, v'limanatem otam et benechem leberbam, v'shivtecha v'eitecha v'lechlecha v'aderech v'shachbecha uv'kumecha uv'tavtam amuzot beitecha v'sharecha le'man yirbu imechem imei benechem al hadama asher nishba Adonai lavotechem latei lahem. Kimei hashamayim al haaretz, vayomer Adonai Moshe lemor daber El b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei bigdehem l'dorotam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf v'tilchelet v'yalachem l'tzitzit Uritem oto, uschartem et kol mitzvot, Adonai vasitem otam velo taturu acharei lovchem acharei nechem, asher atem zunim achareihem, leman tizkeru vasitem et kol mitzvotai, vitem kedoshim lelohechem, ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim, ani Adonai Elohechem emet. Adonai Elohechem emet. And in just a moment, we'll continue in the middle of page 114 with Micha Mocha. After that, we will begin the Amidah together, unmute ourselves for the Kedusha on page 116, and then take a couple minutes for silent prayer and meditation before we come all back together with Oseh Shalom. But first, we'll start at the box here on page 114. Tehilot le'Elyon Baruch Umvorach Moshe u'Miriam u'Bnei Yisrael l'chanu shira b'simcha rabah ve'amru chulam.
Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'eder b'kodesh, no ra tehilot osef eleh.
Shira chadasha shivchu gulim shimchas batayam yachad kulam hoduvim lichu ve'amiru
Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
Sur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Uftechinu Mecha Yehuda Yisrael, Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai Gal Yisrael. Page 115b. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol V'Zocher Chasei Avot v'Imahot Higol Ifnei Leman Shemo V'Yahava Melech Ozer Ufoked Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'Olam Adonai Mechayei Metim Atarav Le'Shia Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayei Metim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofech Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Vichamocha Bal Gevurot Umido Melach Melech Memit Umechayei Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Atah L'chayot Metim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayei HaMetim.
Nekadesh Shimcha Ba'olam, Kishem Shemati Shimoto B'Shnei Moron, Hakotu V'Yad Nevi'echo V'Korozeh El Zeh Yomar.
Nekadesh Shimcha Ba'olam, Kakatu V'Yad Nevi'echa V'Korozeh El Zeh Yomar.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Oretz Kavodo.
Kavodo.
Ozbeko Rosh
Ashkedo,
Godo.
Adir
Adir
V'Chazak,
V'Kozak
Mashmim
Mashmim
Kol,
Ko.
Mitnasim,
Minasim
Lumatzat
Lumatzarafim.
Serafim, Lumatam, Baruch
Lumatam Baruch Yomeru.
Az b'kol ra'ash
Ashkado,
gadol, adir
Adir
v'chazak,
Hazak
mashmim
Mashmim,
kol. Az b'kol
Rashkado,
ra'ash gadol,
Rashkado,
adir
Adir
v'chazak,
Haskado,
mashmim kol. Minasim
Nisnasim, Leomat
leumat
Serafim,
minasim leumat serafim, leumatam
Leotam
baruch
Baruch
yomeru.
Yameru.
Baruch Kavod Adonai Mim Komo. Mim Makoma Komo Kenu Tofi Avitim Lokolenu. Lok
Time
Matai
to Betzion,
Lok
Bekara, Biamani, Lambayatish,
Yomenu Lelambo Etishko.
Dal, Sikadash, Besok Yerushalayim,
Tikadal
Yabalado,
Betikadash
Vado, Neta, Netzaki,
Betikadash
Yeminu,
Ledor
Sirena, Malkutecha, Vadavahama, Bashira, Yuzacha,
Min kom kama kira tofia v'timloch aynukim achakim rachnula matai
Matai
timloch
Kimlo
b'tzion v'krav
B'Tzion,
b'yameinu le'olam v'tishkom
Tishko.
tikadal v'tikadash b'torach l'shalayim dircha ledor vador
Vado,
netzachim
Netzachim.
Iren Malchutecha Ador Hamor Beshirei Uzecha
Zecha, Ayadeh,
Yimlo Kadonai Leolam
Hallelujah.
Elohai Yixion Ledor Vador Hallelujah.
Dorvador nagid godlecha unetzach tzachim kedushatcha nakdish v'shivchacha Eloheinu yivinu l'shalom v'ed ki hamelech gadol v'kadosh ata baruch ata Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. 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 V'yimeru, amen. We'll continue with the full Kaddish, which I won't put up on the screen, but anyone who wants to unmute to respond to the Kaddish, now is the time. Yikadal v'ikadash me Rabbah.
Amen.
Yibrach yirtei v'emlich malchutei v'chayechon v'mochon u'chay l'chol Beit Yisrael b'agalav v'zman kariv v'yimeru.
Amen.
Yitbarach v'shabach yitbar v'shema minaseh v'tadar v'tolal shmei l'kudisha. Elam mikol berchata v'shirata tzufata v'nechamata d'amiran be'alma v'yimeru.
Amen.
Yitkabel tzorgon d'chol Beit Yisrael chadam v'hom d'bishmaya v'yimeru.
Amen.
V'hei shomra min shemaya v'chaim aleinu b'kol Yisrael v'yimeru.
Amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav, hu yaseh
Yaseh shalom aleinu v'kol Yisrael. Amen.
Amen. We'll put us back on mute, and I will ask the pastors to unmute themselves as I put the beginning of the Torah service up on the screen and turn it over to Barry for Ein Kamocha.
Ein kamocha be'elim Adonai b'al kosecha malchusaka malchus kol olamim umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitain. Adonai yivarech es amo v'shalom. Aporachamim. Eitiva bertzon ko esihon. Kivanecha mos Yerushalayim. Ki v'chol levad batochnu. Melech el ram v'nisha Adon olamim. Vayehi ben Aharon vayomer Moshe Kumo Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha miponecha ki mitzion tetzei sorah. Ki mitzion tetzei sorah u'davar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch shenasan Torah. Baruch shenasan Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'hikdushaso.
Thank you so much, Barry. Anyone who's standing may be seated. once again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming together this morning. Nice full screen in front of me, which always makes me happy to see. And of course, before I forget, Yasher Koach to Max in his continued preparation for his bar mitzvah, which is exactly 1 month away. I guess this happens every year, every non-leap year, when February only has 28 days, but the days of the week and the days match up. So today's February 20th, which is Shabbat, and next month on March 20th, he'll be where I'm standing now. Not literally, because we'll be upstairs, but yeah, we're excited to have you keep practicing, and we're excited to see the real deal in a month, Max. Good job.
Thank you.
So this morning we will be reading Parshat Terumah, which literally means gift, or the gifts. And this morning we get the first full account of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, which the Israelites built in the desert. Everything from the measurements, the materials, what's the perimeter wall, what are the materials of the Holy of Holies. It's a long list of different materials, different cubit lengths, different measurements, and all of which I think at this point we're at least passingly familiar with. And it's generally not necessarily anybody's favorite parsha or accounting. I think part of that is because it's also included 3 separate times, almost verbatim, in the Mishkan. We in the Torah we have this list, and then we have kind of the actual gathering of the material, or then we have the actual building, and then we have the consecration, which gives a recap of the building. So it's something I think we all maybe roll our eyes a little bit when we get to this parsha, although I'd be fascinated to hear what, you know, a professional builder or an architect makes of all this. And in fact, I'm not going to lie, when I was first going over the text, getting ready for this Saturday morning, 2 of the pages in my Chumash were stuck together, and I didn't really notice, and I accidentally skipped all of chapter 26, which is what we'll be reading this morning, and I didn't notice till I went back for a second reading. So, you know, that's maybe, I think, a familiar feeling to many of us, or I just outed myself and I'm pretty embarrassed. But either way, you know, that's how we relate to this text in some ways. But my favorite thing I heard about this week's parsha came on a podcast I was listening to that comes out every Friday morning, and the guest host was a professor of religion and politics at Washington University in St. Louis by the name of Dr. Fanny Bialik, and she described this morning's parsha as essentially an IKEA manual. And she described it as an IKEA manual because it does include a really specific set of instructions, but she was also kind of highlighting how incredibly literal this parsha is, as opposed to so much else in the Torah where we have the literal text and, you know, then the layers of metaphorical meaning that we add to it. There's really only kind of one way to read this, and that is in the literal sense, right? When it's talking about 6 cubits, it means 6 cubits. It doesn't mean 6 metaphorical cubits, whatever that could mean. When it's talking about, you know, a stretched out goat skin, that's all we're talking about. But what she pointed out, which I really liked, is that when you're buying and assembling a piece of IKEA furniture, the piece of IKEA furniture is a very real non-metaphorical object, but that piece of furniture, or any new piece of furniture, is really a metaphor for everything else that may be going on in your relationships or in your house. Not necessarily in every case, but I know, you know, the first piece of furniture that Mac and I bought together was our couch, and that was like a big thing for us, and a big decision and a big momentous occasion that we spent tons of time, you know, researching and finding the perfect one. And so, you know, while it may be tempting to just discount this list of what goes into the Mishkan and all the details of building it, there's significance here. And there's certainly significance in how, sanctifying physical space changes the relationship between the people and God, and it certainly changes the relationship between the priestly class and the rest of the people. As we'll get to the sin of the golden calf in just a couple weeks, these things are kind of held side by side, right? Being prohibited from having a physical representation of God, but still really needing some place to physically manifest holiness. And I think certainly this year more than ever, the idea of sacred space and having kind of designated sanctified space is certainly, very alive and real for many of us in a way that we haven't necessarily felt before. I think that we've had to create that sort of sacred space, each of us for ourselves, in a way that we've never been asked to before. And I can see that in that, I kind of place each and every one of you right now, not that I've necessarily been inside all of your houses, but I know where you're sitting, right? Like I know where you set yourself up for prayer. I know how that preparation, is important for each of us, and having that designated space, even if maybe not every one of you has thought about it that way or hasn't gone through like an intense process of where can I pray most intently or where can I tune in best to services. I think it is a really real process. And I think also, evaluating what is the sacred space that I'm standing in. I think for many of you who have been a part of this congregation for so long, I'm pretty sure that there are those of you sitting at home who could write the CAA equivalent of Parshat Terumah, right? Tell me how big each room is, tell me how many chairs there are, how many books we have, where we keep. A couple months ago when Yael Seligman was getting married, she heard from, I'm blanking from who, she heard from Zahava that we had 2 sets of poles to hold up a chuppah, and Zahava knew exactly where they were. And I'd never seen these before in my life. They're in one of the closets off of the upstairs bima. And Barry and Barbara are nodding their head because they also knew that. So there is this kind of intimacy and familiarity that comes along with these physical elevated spaces. And the one piece from this morning's Parsha that is always worth pointing out, even if we are inclined to kind of roll our eyes at everything else, at all the physical descriptions, is what's recounted in chapter 25, verse 8, when God says to Moses, "Ve'asu li mikdash ve'shachanti betocham," and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Not let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in it, but let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And I think at the end of the day, that's what really brings this all together, right? The purpose of holy space isn't to make a house for God, it's to make a space for us in which we can, build that community and build those connections, both between ourselves and the divine. And that's really, I think the most important part of all of this. If you're going to take away one thing from this extended list of materials and measurements, it's that idea of, make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, and how we continue to create that for ourselves in our homes, for ourselves in 53 and a half Washington, or whatever other, synagogue communities, or any spiritual community you might be a part of, is how to really kind of build that intentional space and feeling. So I ask you to keep that in mind as we go into Parshat Terumah. It is a reasonably short reading and it is pretty dry. So unless anyone wants to pause me along the way, I'll probably just go straight through. I also no one told me that they have Yortzeit today, but if you are observing a Yortzeit today and want me to include an Al-Maleh, feel free to let me know that in the chat. Any other comments or questions about Parshat Terumah, or about the idea of the Mishkan, or holy physical space before we get going? Yeah, Bruce, you want to unmute yourself?
I always thought about this in terms of a positive and a negative. Like the positive is this is exactly how to construct the altar. This is how to make the sanctuary. This is how to make, all of it. And the negative part of it is what's not included here is a place for an idol, a place for human sacrifice. It's important to look at it, I think, as also a prescription of what not to do.
Yeah, and I think certainly if we take kind of, as you're suggesting, a half a step back from looking at not just as a specific set of instructions, but also maybe like guidelines for future sets of instructions, right? Like what is and some of that really does live on today. Like the menorah was a centerpiece of the Mishkan and later the temple, and like there's one sitting right over my head, right behind my shoulder, and there's two upstairs on either side of the bima. And similarly, just even from the get-go of this parsha, right? It's all built, all the materials come from gifts. So in terms of like modeling for future, whatever holy space becomes, there's a spirit of generosity that's really kind of built into that. And especially for people, wandering through the desert with limited material wealth, listing all of these specific materials, which tend to be on the extravagant side. We're not talking about like what you have lying around the house. We're talking about kind of a gift of your nicest possessions, does give us that same kind of modeling of like the community generosity that's needed to sustain that spirit. So I appreciate that angle of modeling as well. I think I saw Bonnie and then Joel and then my mom. Oh no, Bonnie's taking her hand down. I saw Joel and then my mom, and then we'll see if anyone else has anything before we start the reading.
I don't wear my pull-up pants on Shabbat, and I put on shoes as opposed to my slippers. So there's also the building of what we adorn ourselves with that adds to sacred space.
Yeah, and I think that ties in really closely with as we continue to bring that up when next time we're rolling our eyes, when there's like an extensive list of the priestly garments, right? And everything that they wear, from kind of their inner vestments to their outer. And just, I think you're right in connecting kind of every sense of what our physical preparation is for spiritual practice. Thank you, Joel. Mom?
Yeah, just a quick point and a question. And that is that among all these semi-precious objects that are part of the building of the Mishkan, there's also mention of grain, of bread, of the showbread that is a man-made object that needs to be replaced every week in this in the Mishkan. I wonder if you could just comment a little bit on this, not as a bread baker, but just as, to talk about, a food object that's actually placed within the Mishkan.
Yeah, so I think, on first, so what my mom's referring to is, and this is where our tradition of challah comes from, right? There are these loaves that are placed every, I think before every Shabbat in the Mishkan, and they sit there for a week until they're replaced the next week. And the initial inclination to many people and that is also listed in this Parsha. The initial inclination for many people goes right along those lines of like, well, we're building a home for God, and so we need to give food for God. And I don't think that's actually it. Especially because ultimately these loaves were eaten by the priests. This isn't, we're not talking about like Santa coming down the chimney and eating the cookies while everyone's asleep. These are very kind of real food that was eaten by real people out in the open. But I do think there is, first of all, I think there's room for this kind of continual replacement of the challah to be, right? That's a continual process. Everything else in the Mishkan, it's it's not a permanent structure in that it is portable, in that they can build it and take it apart and move it. But it is a permanent structure in that everything they are building once, right? They gather the supplies once, they build the individual pieces once, and they, they assemble them and disassemble them. So in that regard, it really is kind of a set permanent structure. And the challah kind of plays the other side of that, right? The challah is almost like a continuous renewal where every week you're kind of creating something new to contribute to the set structure. And it does give kind of a continual buy-in, that there's always more contribution, there's always something to add. And it really does kind of bring something a little bit more temporary into that sense of permanence. Yeah, Jen.
I've just always been curious about, since there's such detail, like the cubic is 18 inches and the design of the rings and the poles, is it replicated? I would think this is like a project that could be undertaken by children in Sunday school or at some level of Jewish education, that there might be people artistically inclined who would want to create this. I don't know if that would be verboten or if it's something that is done, that has been done, and can you address that?
So I'm fairly certain, I could be misremembering or confusing other things, but I think there are like models built to scale in Israel. I'm thinking specifically in the Old City. It's been a long time since I've been in Israel, so like everything's a little bit fuzzy, but I do think there have been models built to scale in Israel, and I think it's on the others, like I think it's a great project for Jewish education to kind of make it a little bit more real. I mean, most chumashim and most commentaries will have pretty detailed diagrams. Like it's certainly not supposed to be something that is not, put down on paper or like completely understood in the physical sense of it. So I think I would have to do a little bit of research after Shabbos to see if there are in fact like replicas that have been built, but I don't think it's verboten. Like I think it's something that's, totally, you're not going to get all the materials, right? So it's not like you're recreating the exact thing in a way, or maybe people have, but odds are you're not recreating the exact thing in a way that would, make people think that you're actually sanctifying a new Mishkan. Yeah, I see Barry Salloway and then Fran, and then we're going to get going with the Torah reading.
Alex, is there anything in this Torah reading that helps me transition out of 11 months of my sacred space into back into society and giving up some of it?
That's a great question. I think there might not be anything specifically in this morning's text, but what I would say is, going back to this idea that we read it 3 times, right? Almost a verbatim, the same passages almost verbatim 3 times, means that we're kind of always reevaluating it in a new light, right? And always kind of figuring out what sacred space means. And it's much different when you're just talking about what the materials are than when you're talking about actually building it. And so I think like kind of trying to keep those small differences in mind helps a little bit in terms of like evaluation under different circumstances and transitions, and even thinking about, a little bit more about what I was talking about with kind of the permanence but portability, right? The Mishkan was a different place when they set it up for the first time next to Mount Sinai than it was, it's going to be slightly different when they set it up after they traveled 3 days and set it up again at some other point in the desert. And so really kind of staying focused on those small differences and how you internalize them, I think is a little bit of a model for what you're talking about. Fran was next. Sharon, did you want to respond specifically to something in there before we go to Fran? Sorry, Fran.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to say for anyone interested on page 1520 in our Chumash, if you have it, there's a diagram of the Mishkan and the furnishings on the next page.
Great.
If you have the Eitz Chaim and you want to look at it.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, Fran.
Yeah, I was thinking, this is, again, what you said before, Alex, this is not a very exciting chapter, but it just strikes me as how wonderful it is that we have a proscribed structure and anything that is proscribed, and how it allows for people to know they've done enough. The idea of knowing limits it's striking to me how powerful that is, that people don't have to exhaust themselves forever trying to prove their adherence, their, that word, whatever, to God. This is it, and that's enough. So that's just what I want to say. It really strikes me.
That's a really beautiful point, and I really appreciate you, bringing that up. And one of the things that always gets talked about around these themes is like how, because we can't help but compare it to our own synagogues, our own temples, our own spaces, and it's like, that same theory. It's like, how ornate do we want it to be? How many, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars does our capital campaign need to be so that we have a space that absolutely takes your breath away? And you'll have both sides of those arguments, right? Like the Jewish community can do so much more with their money than just, install whatever the top of the line, shul technology and architecture is. And it's a beautiful point. And one of the things that, we'll read later on when they're actually collecting the materials is that Moshe got more donations than they could possibly put into building this structure. So again, kind of balancing that sense of generosity with this sense of, well, it's supposed to be this. And so how do we work within these limits rather than trying to go so far above and beyond and on top of that? So thank you for bringing that in. I'm not sure if I've ever thought of it that way. And so clearly we're not all so bored, because that was like a good, 20 minutes of pretty engaging and riveting conversations spurred on by the themes of this morning's reading. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts and voices and questions. With that, we will move on to saying La'asok b'divrei Torah all together, and then we'll start our reading with chapter 26 on page 491 in the Eitz Chaim. And like I said, make sure that page 491 is not stuck to page 492, or you might blink and miss it. So first, let's say La'asok b'divrei Torah together, and then I'll put the Torah reading up on the screen. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen. Amen. Bet hamishkan ta'aseh eser yeriot Sheish Moshar Utachelet Vargaman V'tolat Shani Kiruvim Maseh Choshev Taseh Otam Orech Hayiriyah Hachat Shmoneh V'Esrim Ba'ama V'Rochav Arba Ba'ama Hayiriyah Hachat Midah Achat L'chol Hayiriyot Chamesh hayiriyot tiena chovrot isha el achota v'chamesh yiriyot chovrot isha el achota ve'asita lulot techelet al sfat hayiriyah ha'echat mikatza b'chovaret V'chein taseh b'svat hayiriyah hakitzona b'machberet hashenit 50 lulot taseh ביריעה אחת, ו50 לולות תעשה בקצה היריעה אשר במחברת השנית, מקבילות הלולות אישה לאחותה, ועשית 50 קרסי זהב, וחיברת את היריות אישה לאחותה בקרסים, והיה המשכן אחד, ועשית יריות עזים לאוהל על המשכן, 12 יריות תעשה אותם, אורך היריעה האחת 30 באמה, ורוחב 4 באמה היריעה האחת, מידה אחת ל12 יריות, וחיברת את 5 היריות לבד, ואת 6 היריות לבד, וכפלת את היריעה השישית אל מול פני האוהל, ועשית 50 לולות על שפת היריעה האחת הקיצונה בחוברת, ו50 לולות על שפת היריעה החוברת השנית, ועשית קרסי נחושת 50, והבאת את הקרסים בלולות, וחיברת את האוהל והיה אחד, וסרח העודף ביריות האוהל, חצי היריעה העודפת תסרח על אחורי המשכן, והמה מזה בעודף, באורך יריות האוהל יהיה שרוח על צידי המשכן, מזה ומזה לכסותו. ועשית מכסה לאוהל אורות עלים מאדמים, ומכסה אורות תחשים מלמעלה, ועשית את הקרשים למשכן, עצי שיטים עומדים 10 אמות אורך הקרש, ואמה וחצי אמה רוחב הקרש האחד, 2 ידות לקרש האחד משולבות, אישה אל אחותה, כן תעשה לכל קרשי המשכן, ועשית את הקרשים למשכן, 20 קרש לפאת נגבה תימנה, ו40 אדני כסף תעשה תחת 20 הקרש, 2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד לשתי ידותיו, ו2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד לשתי ידותיו, ולצלע המשכן השנית לפאת צפון 20 קרש, ו40 אדניהם כאסף, 2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד, ו2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד, ולירכתי המשכן ימה תעשה 6 קרשים, ו2 קרשים תעשה למקוצות המשכן בירכתיים, ויהיו תואמים מלמטה ויחדיו, יהיו תמים על ראשו אל הטבעת האחד, כן יהיה לשניהם, לשני המקצות יהיו, והיו 8 קרשים, ואדניהם כסף 16 אדנים, 2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד, ו2 אדנים תחת הקרש האחד, ועשית אבריחים עצי שיטים, 5 לקרשי צלע המשכן האחד, ו5 אבריחים לקרשי צלע המשכן השנית, ו5 אבריחים לקרשי צלע המשכן לירכתיים ימה, והבריח התיכון בתוך הקרשים, Mavriach min hakatze el hakatze bet hakrashim titzapeh zahav v'tavotehem taseh zahav batim labrichim v'tzipita tabrichim zahav v'hakemota et hamishkan kemishpato asher hareta bahar. So like I said, one fell swoop going through a whole lot of details. If anyone is looking for kind of a late pandemic project and wants to build their own scale model, you now know all about the rings and the planks and the dolphin skins, which we talked extensively about last year, which aren't really dolphin skins. So you can make that your next long-term art project if you want. So with that, we'll take a pause from the book of Exodus. In a moment after the healing service, we're going to read this morning's special maftir for Parshat Zachor. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But for now, first I want to hand it over to Sharon and take a deep breath and transition us into the healing service, which is such an important part of us coming together on a Shabbat morning.
Okay, so let's begin the healing service with the song that we always use for beginning the healing service. Thanks to Debbie Friedman, who wrote it. And those of you who know it or have it in front of you, sing with me, please. Mi sheberach avotenu mekor habracha Limotenu, may the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu, Makor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach avotenu v'imotenu Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Moshe v'Aharon, David u'Shlomo, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Bilha v'Zilpa, hu yivarech v'yirafeh et hacholim b'nei Avraham v'Sara, b'nei Adam v'Chava. May God, who blessed our ancestors, bless and heal all those in need of it now. Bronson de Stadler, Shoshana Bat Pinchas V'Chana, Nancy Peace, Louisa McCleary, Eliyahu Betzalel Ben Pinchas V'Chana, Mayor Ben Fega V'Aaron Yitzchak, Dennis McNeely, Jess Kramer, Alexis Watson, May Daw, Bob Jelly, Bruce Mallory, Alan Mann, Barbara Dowd, Yaakov Chaim Ben Herschel, Yitzchak V'Batya, John O'Brien, Jacques Mansay, Carol Barker, Catherine Doloff, Ken Bosey, Chana Bat Rivka, Lorraine Daniluk, Denise Stelmack, Dennis Montini, Yitzchak Ben Yisrael, Madeline Blake, Rachel Barcelona, Corey Brown, Kara Smoley, Adam Stander, Fotios Rallis, Chana Esther Bat Ayala Hadar, Batya Bat Neshama, Meir, Zohar, Vered. And it just strikes me as I read down this list and think about what's happening in the world, just how many different kinds of healing there are and how little we understand often about the kind of healing that any one person may really need, body, spirit, and so many other ways. So let's just wish for all kinds of healing, and anyone who has the name of someone else you'd like to specifically include, would you let us know that now, please?
Yeah, Eve, if you want to unmute yourself.
Ilanit. I'm sorry, I don't know her last name.
Thank you. Bruce?
Robin and Frank Christo.
Marty?
Karen Stroop.
Joel?
Elliot Saperstein.
Barry Salloway?
My dad, Bill Salloway.
The pastors?
Edelnesha bat Zev ve'etanesha, Chaya Yehudit bat Ruvain Elisha Halevi ve'edelnesha, Avraham ben Zev ve'etanesha, Chaya Sora bat, she doesn't know her parents' names, Anita Wilson, Danielle Rutes, Leslie Wilson, Nate Hoskin, Greg Bowe, Kate Leung, Woody Leung, Pat Matson, and the rest of them.
Gayla Adela, Bas Barrelade, Fred Camaro.
Bob Mandel?
Selima Jones Daly, Kurt Curtis, Carol Freeband, Ruth Hirsch, Kathleen Harney.
Mike?
Avraham, Ben Miriam, Dina Bracha, Bat Miriam, and I think of the people in Texas that are suffering in many ways, as Sharon pointed out, but especially those who have suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning and every kind of calamity that came about.
Thanks, Mike. And Mom, did you have a name?
Yeah, Meshulam ben Chava, Shoshana bat Mortimer.
Did I miss any hands or any names? And just to add to what Sharon was saying, as we take a couple more moments to pray for healing, I often talk about kind of expanding the circle and kind of expanding our prayers for healing as wide as they can go. But building off what you said, Sharon, about kind of all the different layers of healing that are needed, or all the different types of healing that are needed, right? For every one of those names, there's the people that's a person. There's people surrounding those people who are also kind of sharing that pain and suffering and that hurt, who need healing of their own. And so really kind of thinking about all the, spreading our prayers for healing as far as wide as we can, and kind of the ripple effects of all of this, both of the various ills that we're praying for and of the healing we hope to spread. So let's take just a couple more moments and share our prayers and thoughts of healing. Whenever you're ready, Sharon.
בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעבורם, בשחר זה הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחלימם ולרפאותם, ולהחזיקם ולהחיותם, וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף, שבתים לזעוק, רפואה קרובה לבוא, השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to all of you for sharing in the prayers of healing. So we're done with Parshat Terumah, but we're not quite done with Torah reading yet this morning. So today is Shabbat Zachor, which is the Shabbat before Parshat Purim. sorry, not the Shabbat before Parshat Purim. There is no Parshat Purim. It's the Shabbos before the holiday of Purim. And it literally means the Shabbat of memory. And it has to do with the fact that Haman, who is, you know, the big bad of the Esther story, his full kind of title is Haman the Agagite. And we'll read about Agag, who is the king of the Amalekites in the Haftorah from the book of Samuel. And basically it all roots back to the nation of Amalek, who we read about a couple weeks ago when after the Israelites left Egypt, they were kind of attacked at their weakest point from behind, the stragglers of the camp. And also after kind of the emotional and physical exhaustion of leaving Egypt, the nation of Amalek kind of snuck up on them and attacked them along the way. And so that leads us to the passage we're going to be reading this morning, which is actually from pretty close to the end of the Torah. It's from Deuteronomy chapter 25, where we are commanded, even though this is called Shabbat Zachor, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more after the Haftarah. This is called Shabbat Zachor, which means the Shabbat of memory. But the thing we're supposed to remember is to kind of get our revenge on the people of Amalek by wiping them off the face of the earth, which is yeah. We'll get into it a little bit more. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I encourage you to follow along with the passage I'm about to read. If you have an Eitz Chaim, it's on page 1135. It's chapter 25. Verse 17 in Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy 25:17, and I'll put it up on the screen and read through it. It's pretty short, but it's worth following along. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeitchem mitzrayim asher karcha baderech Vayzanev becha kol nechashalim acharecha ve'atayef ve'yagea ve'lo yarei Elohim ve'haya ve'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha Noten lecha nachala l'rishta timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. And like I said, that is pretty short, and I am going to talk about it a bunch more. Not a bunch more, but a little bit more. So I'm just going to read through it in English too to make sure everyone kind of has the full context. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How, undeterred by the fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. And so that's actually a good transition to the Haftarah, this verse of when Lord God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that God is giving you, because that's pretty much exactly where we pick up in the book of Samuel. We have King Saul, who is charged with making this commandment a very real thing, and he is commanded to literally wipe the nation of Amalek off the map, and he does not succeed. Well, it's not that he doesn't succeed. He kind of chooses not to fulfill that commandment to completion. And with that, I'll let you follow along in the English as my mom takes over to read us through this passage from Samuel, which is on page 1281 in the Eitz Chaim. Mom, you're muted. Hold on one sec. Your tech guy's asleep on the job.
There
we go. Not asleep on the job. I know that was a poor pun.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet b'tzedek. Vayomer Shmuel el Shaul oti shalach Adonai l'mishachacha l'melech alamo al Yisrael v'ata shema l'kol divrei Adonai. Ko amar Adonai tivot pakaditi et asher asa Amalek liYisrael asher sam lo baderech ba'aloto miMitzrayim ata lech v'hikita et Amalek v'hacharamtem et kol asher lo v'lo tachmol alav v'heimata me'ish ad isha me'olel v'ad yonek mishor or v'ad seh migamal v'ad chamor v'yishama Shaul et ha'am v'yifkedem batlaim 200,000 ragli v'aseret alafim et ish Yehuda. Vayavo Shaul ad ir Amalek, vayarev banachal, vayomer Shaul el hakeni lechu sururidu mitoch Amaleki henosifcha imo v'ata asita chesed in kol bnei Yisrael Balotam mi Mitzrayim, vayasar keni mitoch Amalek, vayach Shaul et Amalek, mechavila boacha Ashur, asher al pnei Mitzrayim, vayitpos et Agag melech Amalek chai, et kol ha'am hecherim lefi charev. Vayachmo Shaul ve'am al Agag v'gam meitav hatzon v'habakar v'hamishnim v'al hakarim v'al kol hatov v'lo avu hacharimam v'chol hamlacha nimivza v'names Ota hecherimu, vayehi dvar Adonai el Shmuel lemor, nichamti, ki himlachti et Shaul lemelech, ki shav me'acharai, vetvarai lo hikim, vayichar lishmuel, vayizak el Adonai kol halayla, Vayashkem Shmuel Likrat Shaul Baboker Vayugad Lishmuel Lemor Vashaul HaKarmela V'hinei Matziv Lo Yad Vayisov Vayavor Vayered Hagilgal Vayavo Shmuel El Shaul Vayomer lo Shaul, Baruch atah Adonai, Hakimoti et dvar Adonai. Vayomer Shmuel, Umeh, Kol hatzon haseh ve'oznai, Ve'kol habakar, Asher anochi shomea. Vayomer Shaul, Me'amaleki Hevi'um asher chamal ha'am amitav hatzon ve'habakar l'ma'an zevach l'Adonai Elohecha ve'et hayoter hecherim hecheramnu vayomer Shmuel el Shaul Teref agida lecha et asher diber Adonai Eli halayla vayomru lo daber vayomer Shmuel halo im katona ta beinecha rosh shivtei Yisrael ata vayim shachacha Adonai lemelech al Yisrael vayishlachacha Adonai vadarech vayomer lech v'hacharamta et hachataim et Amalek v'nilcham tavo ad kalotam otam v'lama lo shamata b'kol Adonai v'tat el hashalal v'tas hara b'nei Adonai Vayomer Shaul el Shmuel asher shamati b'kol Adonai va'elech v'derech asher shlachani Adonai v'avi et Agag melech Amalek et Amalek hecheramti v'yikach ha'amer shalal sonu v'akar reshit ha'cherem Lisboach, Ladonai Elohecha b'Gilgal, Vayomer Shmuel, Hachefetz Ladonai b'olo tusvachim, Kishmoa b'kol Adonai, Hine Shemoa mizevach tov, Lakshiv mechevel elim, Hi chatat kesed, Mary ve'avon ve'ad utrafim, Haftar. Yan ma'asta et devar Adonai, vayimascha mimelech, vayomer Shaul Shmuel chatati, ki avarti et pi Adonai ve'et dvarecha, ki yareti et ha'am, vayishma b'kolam, ve'ata sana et chatati, Vishuv imi ve'eshtachavel Adonai, vayomer Shmuel el Shaul, lo ashuv imach, ki ma'asta et dvar Adonai, vayima'ascha Adonai, miot melech al Yisrael, vayisov Shmuel la'alechet, vayachazek bichnaf milo vayikara, Vayomer elav Shmuel, Kara Adonai et mamlachat Yisrael, Me'alecha hayom unetanana, L'reacha hatov mimeka, V'gam netzach Yisrael, Lo yishaker v'lo yinachem, Ki lo adam hu lihinachem, Vayomer chatati ata kabdeni na neged ziknei ami v'neged Yisrael v'shuv imi v'nishtachaveti l'Adonai Elohecha vayashav Shmuel acharei Shaul vayishtachu Shaul l'Adonai vayomer Shmuel Hagishu Elai et Agag melech Amalek vayelech elav Agag ma'adanot vayomer Agag achen sarmar hamavet vayomer Shmuel kasher shikla nashim charbecha ken tishkol minashim imecha vayishazev Shmuel et Agag lifnei Adonai b'Gilgal, vayelech Shmuel haramata v'Shaul alal beito givat Shaul. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'oseh, ha'medaber u'mekayem, Shechol Torah v'emet v'tzedek, Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim dvarecha, בדבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם. כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי בית חיינו, ולעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו, ברוך אתה אדוני. משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו, אדוני אלוהינו באלוהו הנביא עבדך, ומלכות בית דוד משיחך, במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו על כיסאו, לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים מכבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה ועבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך, מברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, וקדש השבת.
Amen. Thank you, Mom. Yasher Koach. That was a long one. In fact, longer than this morning's Torah reading. And I did, we did briefly talk back and forth about perhaps shortening it, but really kind of beginning to end. There's so much there, not only related to kind of Saul and Samuel and the failure to fulfill this commandment, but also just a lot about leadership, a lot about forgiveness, a lot about kind of what are the perceptions of what God values, right? Kind of obedience versus sacrifice and gifts, and really just start to finish. There's so much there to be unpacked, or at least read along with. So thank you for taking that all on. And I do want to reflect a little bit more on these themes of Shabbat Zachor. Something, it's a little bit hard to fathom and understand that for all the traditions of memory and all the importance that memory plays in our culture and in our Jewish lives, when we have a Shabbat named Shabbat Zachor, named the Shabbat of memory, it really is a little bit difficult that it's about this kind of, bearing a grudge and erasure of an entire nation. That's certainly not what we think about when we think about memory, or at least it's not what I think about when I think about memory. And it is also a little bit incongruous with only 1 week after we were celebrating Rosh Chodesh Adar, right? I have a hard time equating how this theme of really pervasive joy that goes along with Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, whoever enters the month of Adar, their joy is multiplied, with only a week later, this commandment of vengeful annihilation. The two things don't seem to mesh all that well together. And even the heart of the commandment of Shabbat Zachor it's difficult to understand, and it can seem like the very verses that it's based on are at odds with each other. As we read just a couple minutes ago from Deuteronomy, Zachor et asher asalacha Amalek, timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Remember what the nation of Amalek did to you when you went out of Egypt. They surprised you on your march when you were famished and weary. So blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. The obvious question that we wind up asking every year is, which exactly is it? Do we never forget, or do we completely erase the memory? Or is it somehow possible to do both? And the other question that I've been thinking a lot about this year, which I asked on Thursday morning for those of you who joined us for the Minyan, is what exactly is the difference between being told to remember something and being told not to forget something? What are the different possible layers of meaning that we might want to unpack there? And one of the things I was thinking about was framing this passage in similar terms that we talked about with this morning's Parshat Terumah. Thinking of this passage of Parshat Zachor as a sort of instruction manual. Do this thing exactly as I am telling you. There is no metaphorical subtext here. It is just a simple and historical commandment. And the Haftarah that my mom just read seems to support that. King Saul has a chance to literally eradicate the nation of Amalek, to fulfill this commandment in the most literal sense. He falters in the moment, and he's punished by forfeiting the royal line to David. But it turns out that throughout rabbinic history, that perhaps Amalek, in the literal national sense, and this commandment to eradicate them, was not quite as strict as the Torah makes it out to be. And perhaps there was a little bit more room for redemption than either the Torah passage or the passage from Samuel lays out. One of the sources that I came across this week that I never actually knew before is that there is a story told in 2 different sections of the Talmud that actually recounts descendants of Haman, who again is kind of the Amalekite that makes it throughout history, that there were stories of the descendants of Haman learning and teaching Torah in Bnei Brak. And so not just kind of not eradicating them, but actually that they got to some sort of full acceptance within kind of the most holy and dignified levels of rabbinic thought and Jewish society, which is really a pretty striking divergence from eradicate the memory of Amalek for all time. And once the ancient Talmudic rabbis kind of cracked the door to this battle with Amalek maybe not being so literal about complete eradication, some of the Hasidic masters of the 18th century kind of throw that door wide open. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev posits that the eternal struggle with Amalek is actually an internal one. That every person, Jew and non-Jew alike, has the seed within them of a potential kind of Amalek aspect. In my mind, it represents something akin to the dark side of the Force in Star Wars. That this is buried deep within our hearts. To him, with his Hasidic view that each person is a microcosm of the entire world, the decree against Amalek is truly a perpetual and unforgettable mitzvah, an exhortation to remember always to subdue that seed and to be our best selves and encourage those around us to do likewise. Another Hasidic master, Rabbi Gedalia Rabinovitz of Linitz, has a different take. The word used in the passage for what Amalek did to the people that we read this morning is asher karcha baderech. This is usually translated along the lines of they surprised you on your way, but it shares the Hebrew root of kush reif, kuf resh, kar, which means cold. He describes the transition that took place as Israel left Egypt and encountered Amalek as a cooling off. And I want to read this in a translation of his own words, because it's really pretty wonderful. The hearts of Israel were filled with flame when they saw the wonders the Blessed Holy One performed in bringing them forth from Egypt. The Egyptians were struck down by miracles, the 10 plagues, and the splitting of the sea. Seeing all those things that happened to our ancestors, even a brick in the wall would cry out to praise God's great name. But wicked Amalek dressed those miracles up in ordinariness, thus cooling off the intensity of Israel's faith. then they too became forgetful of God's loving kindness. And what Rabbi Gedalia here is laying out, to me, is the very essence of this command not to forget. Not to forget the initial flame and passion and optimism that are the connection to the divine and that are the core of the forces for good within each and every one of us. And that makes the struggle with what Amalek is and what Amalek represents and these commandments a lot more real. Because of the famous historical special commandment to hear Parshat Zachor, to hear these verses read aloud from the Torah, this week for the first time in a while, not from within this community necessarily, but I've heard on kind of different listservs in Jewish communities, kind of laments and different kind of planning and solution regarding not being able to gather and read this passage from a physical scroll, because there is this really kind of elevated emphasis on this being a really important mitzvah to hear these words. And before spending time with some of these Hasidic sources, I was doing a little bit more eye rolling of all the things that we've missed over the last year, all the different times we haven't read from the physical Torah scroll. This is really the time when we're going to come back and say, oi, oi lanu, like this is so terrible for us. I couldn't quite buy it. But I think viewing this passage of Zachor and viewing these commandments of both remembering and not forgetting as internalized struggles with the forces of Amalek, as internalized and omnipresent kind of struggling to remember, to suppress some bad instincts and to not forget to elevate our good instincts, are really kind of a great thing to elevate and a great passage to be focusing on and to be thinking about. Memory is something we do every single day, and so to bring that sense of remembering and not forgetting into our lives, into the lives of those around us, as really remembering kind of to always be striving for self-improvement, and to make the world around us a little bit of a better place each and every day. So some different perspectives on Shabbat Zachor, for sure, that I was glad to discover this year. I don't know if anyone else has any brief thoughts they want to share before we move on to the end of services. I know it's been a little bit long this morning. I see Sharon. Yeah, please.
So thank you so much for that, Alex, because this is something that has puzzled me. And I feel like verse 18 it comes off as very confusing to me. It's translated as how, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march and, cut you down and all of that. But when you read it in the Hebrew, it said, V'lo yarei Elohim comes at the very end. And it reads in a very confused way, to some of us anyway, because it sounds like it's talking about the Israelites losing their awe or fear of God. And when you talk about the Asher Karcha being about cooling off and the struggle being internal, I feel like that really fits with that otherwise very confusing sentence that in a sense then could be read as, you sort of succumb to that and, sort of lost your way, lost the light to follow. And so you were very vulnerable. I'm not sure if any of that is making sense, but it's somehow gelling for me.
No, I think it does. And it's one of these instances where if you only read the English, you miss that nuance, right? It's not, at best in the Hebrew, it's not clear. The English, at least this English translation, makes it clear, right? That we think that it was the nation of Amalek that did not fear God the Hebrew leaves it very unclear whether it's the Israelites who are not fearing God or the Amalekites who are not feeling God, who are not fearing God. And again, this happened right after the Exodus. And in terms of like setting the tone for everything else that happens in the 40 years wandering through the desert, right? There's always these little pitfalls. And in some ways, this was one of the very early ones, right? If the Israelites thought that it was going to be kind of a walk in the park to get from the other side of the Red Sea all the way to the promised land, this was kind of the moment where that idealism maybe fell apart a little bit. And so I think thinking of kind of the long-term repercussions of this conflict with Amalek, right? And was this the cooling that contributed to things like, having a lapse of faith when Moses didn't come down from Sinai in time and needing to build the golden calf, or not believing, needing to send spies when you're ready to enter the land because things didn't go as smooth as you anticipated them going. And so thinking about how we can possibly, almost layer these events on top of each other and track them in that way, I think is a very, it's a very real thought and a much different perspective than I've gotten in previous years on what Shabbat Zachor is about.
Very helpful. Thank you.
That's what I'm here for. Any other questions or comments or thoughts before we move on to the end of services? Great. Well, I'm sure you'll all be, sitting with that as we continue on our march towards Purim this week. I will close the ark. I guess also the other thing to say, Sharon, is that you don't need to thank me. You need to thank, the rabbis of 18th century Europe who are sitting around thinking deeply about these things. I'm just channeling their words, but
I would never have known it if you hadn't told me.
There we go. Let's continue with the full Kaddish. I invite everyone to take themselves off mute to respond to the Kaddish, which I will not put up on the screen. Yikadal v'yikadash me'rava.
Amen.
Talma divrach yirtei v'mlich malchutei v'chayachon v'machon v'chay l'chol Beit Yisrael v'agolav v'zman kariv v'meru. Barach v'shavach v'par v'shema v'naseh v'tadar v'talei v'tal shmei l'kudesha. Elam mikol berchata v'shatat shukata v'nechamata d'amiram be'alma v'meru.
Amen.
Yitkabel Toradon d'chol Beit Yisrael kadam lahon l'Yishmaya v'meru.
Amen.
Eishlam Rav min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al-koisha v'meru.
Amen.
Yoseh shalom b'mromav. Uyaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'meru.
Amen.
And we will go back on mute, and I will put the Aleinu back up on the screen, and we will sing together on page 183. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latei gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot halama, shelo sam chalkeinu kahem, vegoralenu kechol hamonam, V'anachnu korim, mishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, shehu noteh shamayim v'yoseh la'aretz, u'moshe v'ikaro b'shamayim mimal, shrinatu zo, begavhei meromim, hu Eloheinu einod, and bet malkeinu efesu ato, kakatuv betorato, ve'adatayom le'ashevota el levavecha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, b'shamayim imal, v'al haaretz mitachat einod, kakatuv betoratecha. Adonai loch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar Haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad. Ushemo echad. Mourner's Kaddish is on page 184. In just a moment, I'll invite everyone to unmute and join along or respond. This week, Congregation Avas Achim marks the Yortzeiten of Leslie Bunham Hafetz, Faye Harnch, Seidel Epstein, Ethel Wexler, Richard Goldberg, George Blair, and Myron Stone. May their memories be a blessing. Please join me for the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash
Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Alma dibrach yirtei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael v'agala u'izman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Baruch.
Barach le'olam. Amen.
Barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom mimromav Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. We'll go back on mute. Anyone who is standing may be seated. Once again, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you all so much for everyone, and Yasher Koach to everyone who participated this morning, including Barry and Sharon and my mom and Max and everyone who chimed in for Ashrei and Shema and everything else. It's good to hear everyone's voices. So at the beginning, before we started services, we were talking about how shipping Hamantashen might not make sense because it costs a lot more to ship them than it could to make them. And so maybe the next best thing is making sure everyone in your life knows how to bake Hamantashen. And to that end, my mom will be teaming up with Fran Kaplan tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. over Zoom to take us through the process of making Hamantashen start to finish for bakers of all ages and skill levels. Grandchildren, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, whatever. Tell them to log on and get their Hamantashen ingredients ready. The recipe went out in the e-blast, and in a reminder, if anyone still needs it, let me know. That's tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then obviously we are moving towards Purim. Thursday night at 8, we will be doing the Megillah reading together with Temple Emmanuel in Haverhill. If anyone is still interested in reading Hebrew or English or creative or otherwise, that sign up also went out in the e-blast and will go out again. Please consider once more sharing your voices. And of course, we're still going with our Thursday morning minyan. And as far as adult ed goes, the next weeks are going to be a little bit weird. I'm just going to say this now and I'll send that out again in an email and then we'll finish up. We're not going to be meeting this Tuesday because there is a speaker of interest being sponsored by Congregation Shirat Hayam in Swampscott. It's the writer of a new book about kind of the life and times of biblical Joseph. I believe it's called Was Yosef on the Spectrum? So that author will be speaking on Tuesday night. I'll make sure the link is in the e-blast. You do need to pre-register. So that's this Tuesday night. And then we were planning on switching to Mondays at the beginning of March, but as Mike helpfully pointed out, there's a bunch of Latin programs on Monday nights in March that we are co-sponsoring, and we don't actually need to switch to Tuesdays until the middle of March for the Intro to Judaism class. So I will clarify the dates for the next couple weeks in an email to all of you who come to Adult Ed and in the e-blast. But I apologize in advance for any confusion and kind of adjusting on the fly. But we will still continue to learn together and do some learning with the greater Jewish community and some learning with our greater Jewish community. Any other announcements, things you want your friends and family to know? Yeah, Barbara Ann.
There should be something in the e-blast this week about a program from the New Hampshire Jewish Film Festival. which is this is aside from the regular part of the festival. This is a Israeli TV series. There's 10 episodes, and it's very, very good. So check it out in the e-blast, and there's a link, etc.
And happy birthday, Jason Montebianca, tomorrow.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for putting that on our radar, both the film festival and the birthday. And just the last thing that I'll mention as we move towards Purim to be on the lookout for, we are going to be delivering Mishloach Manot to everyone in the greater Newburyport area. So for those of you tuning in from not out of state Massachusetts, but way out of state Massachusetts, you know, you might not get a package on your doorstep, but if you see someone who you know dropping something off in your mailbox or your front door, you can assume that it's friendly on Thursday or Friday. So be ready for that. And thank you to the folks who have volunteered to help with delivery and driving. It's no small feat. So with that, we will call it a day, and we will conclude with Hatikva followed by Kiddush. Kol balevav penima nefesh Yehudi holy alfatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia Olo atikvatenu hatikva b'shnot alpayim Liotam chofshi ve'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Liotam chofshi ve'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. B'ni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam oti le'olam. Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheish yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. U'vayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash. Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Al kein baracham na'atim mashravi gadsheu savri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'hakol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. So
Shabbat
great.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Have a wonderful week.
Everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Good week.
Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom. I have to go.
Mary and who? Mary and Bible.
Everyone was quick to take off. I guess that meant I went too long.
Very nice.